welcome you to All Things Esoteric Podcast. Today is February 15th, 2022, 6:51 p.m. Eastern Standard Time from New York, New York. Welcome, Anthony. You here with me?
Hi.
Hey, how are you doing? Good evening.
I'm doing great. How you doing?
I'm doing well, as I am looking at a very exciting star map that I want to get into just right away before we start talking about Hekate, or Hekate, as some others might know her. She will be the subject tonight. But before we go there, we are having a Leo full moon occurring within hours of this broadcast. And it's February 16th, 2022 at 11:55 and 50 seconds a.m. Eastern Standard Time. I go with New York, New York. So adjust your time and your maps accordingly. Also using the whole sign system this evening. But we're looking at a full moon that is very full at 27 degrees, 59 minutes. So basically it's 28. We have to look at it that way. 28 and 29 degrees, we're getting into very potent degrees where we are no longer fully the sign that we were for the last degrees. We're moving into the next sign. We're evolving. We're transmuting like we do everything. So Leo's getting ready to go in Virgo, and that happens within hours of this full moon. So Virgo is a more serious tone to the moon, so we have to remember that. At 27 degrees, going into the sign of Virgo, also conjunct the fourth house, which is really important to see. And we're on this theme again with the Capricorn energies that we've been talking about on the podcast of relationships. We've still got Venus in Capricorn at 16 degrees, but the Leo full moon will also bring in Mars in Capricorn at 16 degrees, conjunct, same degree, within a second of each other, literally. They are sitting in the 8th house together in Capricorn, so that is some serious relational themes going on there, which I'm not going to get into. Just continuing this point of we really need to relationally get our stories on the same page, meaning finding solutions. Capricorn is about finding solutions and structures, and we know this through Saturn. And we've had the Venus-Capricorn dance back and forth, and now Venus is fully moving forward, Mars is moving forward, and the planets are moving. The only thing in retrograde is that south node. So that's south and north node. That's important to note. All the planets are in movement. So we've got a lot of change coming in and a lot of activity when we have all these forward movements. So the full moon is going to bring about Leo concerns. Leo is fixed fire. He is a fixed sign, and he rules the 5th house. And the 5th house is children and drama, theater, pleasures, along with bed pleasures, where we like to play. It is a generous house. Leos are generous. It's gregarious. It can be a house where sometimes we can be too much of it, so we can get lazy. It's ruled by the sun, which is the ego. So where is the sun? Well, in full moons, the sun is always directly opposite the moon. So the sun is over there in Aquarius, the opposite sign, in detriment, I will say, because the opposite sign of Leo is Aquarius. And it's sitting in the midheaven, as the very top of the chart, in a Pisces midheaven. Midheaven is where everybody can be seen. It's opposite of the home, the 4th house, the hidden house, where the moon is conjunct, sitting there with dealing with issues of home, wanting to go into the home. And Leo's going to go into the home with courage, because Aquarius is going to say, look, I know that we have this moon, and I know that that's important, but so is forward thinking. So is finding solutions. And Aquarians are about finding solutions. Aquarians are fixed air. So we have this tug of war with fixed fire and fixed air. There's a lot of other things going on, but the theme here is Leo standing up for himself in courage, but the courage isn't anymore so much about the ego as it is about the family. It's almost like, the fourth house is home and Leo is the fifth. It's like Leo's coming back and having to relearn what's going on with family dynamics. And Capricorn's been in on this with Venus. And now we have Mars and bringing a lot of energy to the table in relationships. A lot. And there's a lot more to be said, as I said there. But this is clearly about that. And I think it's important, wherever your 27 degree is in your own chart, is where this will impact you the greatest. So that's what's important to look at. And it's just a theme, along with other themes. There's so much power here, though, in this full moon, being as full as it is and being in the strong sign of Leo. There's also a trine here that I want to bring up that's really important, that ties in. I say Hekate. I know she can be Hekate. I understand that. I've studied the different names of her as far as those two names. She's many names, but those two names are similar, but they're different, and I just go with Hekate. It feels more right to me. It's interesting to me. For me personally, nickname is Kate, and I have a 26 degree Hekate, and I have a 26 degree Cancer sun. So my sun is the same degree as Hekate in the same sign. She came in with me. You see. There's no other way to look at it. It's my sun. And she's right there in the same degree, in the same sign. It's just uncanny to me. When I realized that, I almost fell out of my chair. I was like, what's going on here? You're really here. What is the sun? The sun's our ego. It's Leo's ruler, remember? It's masculine, yang, or yang energy. It's fire. So
interesting. Leo the lion, and then Hekate was actually depicted with lions a lot.
Mm-hmm. Yes. So let us not belabor any longer, and let's get into her, because I'm ready to get into the energy of this beautiful goddess. Are you not? I am.
Of course, always ready.
All right, so hey guys, check out the full moon. There's some power there. There's a lot of beautiful things happening. I was going to talk about the trine. I'm sorry. In this full moon, Hekate is sitting in the 11th house of Aries at 27 degrees, 45 minutes. Aries is cardinal fire. Aries is the first house, god of war. There's a companionship with righteous activity in Hekate there. There's a power going on in that sign. She's infused with, and it's in the house of others, Aquarius. So she's interested in, which goes along with the archetype of whom she is. The mother is in protecting. She's a voice for others here. A strong voice, a moving forward voice in the Aquarian house, 11th house of your legacy and others, and she is speaking very, very forthrightly and moving out in cardinal ways with her there. So she's trining the moon in Leo, forming this beautiful working energy with the moon, which is the mother, the female, the fourth house. Incredible. And trining the 8th house. So that means that she's gone through that 7th house of others, and she's just going into the 8th house. There's a trine there. And the 8th house is, of course, Hekate's other side besides Cancer. So she points to the moon, and then she points to the 8th house in this water configuration. It's quite beautiful how she's pointing to her Scorpio side and she's pointing to her moon side in a trine straight up into the 11th house of others. So it's quite clear that she's wanting to speak, and she is, and we're not the only ones that are talking about her She is repleniscent. If you go out there, she's everywhere, showing up in different parts of the internet, in Facebook groups. I recommend a group called Keeping Her Keys. Keeping Her Keys is absolutely excellent. It's one of the best channels on her. I have drawn a lot of information about the goddess through this teacher. Highly recommend. Can't say enough about her. Check her out. So let me go in for just a little bit of a background on Hekate. And we know through the study of the charts and the larger sky map that since the first 4 prominent goddesses were discovered in the early 19th century, we have seen them usher in significant and sweeping changes regarding women's rights and the overall expression of the feminine.
And you mean the asteroids that they're named after, right?
Right. The asteroid goddesses, this is correct. So it would be the 4 that we discovered last week together. The main 4, those and the others that have come forth. And there have been many, many asteroids that have been named after goddesses or mythological expressions that have been tied in. So it's quite fascinating to see where they show up when you start adding them to a chart. So we've seen this especially, this feminine expression, I think, within the United States, where freedom of expression and the First Amendment rights are taken a bit more seriously, right?
Mm-hmm.
So having said this, I think if you are in America and you're listening to this, I encourage you to read and study the feminine and how she is seen in other parts of the world, how she is treated in other expressions of her all over the world besides the United States. Begin to look at how the feminine is there in other cultures. I think that we are incredibly privileged to have a platform to be able to usher in these higher expressions of the feminine without any persecution, because there are countries where women are still, their voices are silenced. They're not seen in an expression of balance and harmony with the masculine. The feminine is mistreated. And I think that those days need to be done everywhere. And this should no longer be anywhere or tolerated. And I'm not going to go into some of the things that we're doing to the feminine that are still happening in our world, but I think you know of what I speak. It's just not cool. So as we see more and more of these stars and dwarf planets and asteroids step forward into our telescopes, our minds and our hearts, we will also see her continued change of expression among humans. So I think to not learn these energetic signatures, which are making themselves clear in deeply profound, understood manners of expression, is to cling to that which is dead and rotten and old, and it must be discarded and shedded. I really believe this. If we won't shed the skins of prejudice and race and creeds and intolerance against the feminine, they will be shed for us, and that would be a most uncomfortable situation. How that looks will depend on us, always. But we must allow expressions to be unfettered and free, going forward within balance and harmony for all, but unfettered and free. I was writing this and I had to underline it, because I think the feminine, when it comes out, for some reason in a way that we've not seen before, we lose sight that it's the feminine coming out, and we look at the face of it instead of the expression. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
So I know I said a lot there, but I was really passionate about it as I was thinking about the feminine and how, as a little girl, I wasn't taught anything about the feminine. I was taught to do the things a feminine should do, which is brush her teeth and keep herself clean and, try to eat good and yada yada. But I really wasn't taught how to express my femininity. I had to learn that on my own. And those are difficult roads to navigate. And there were a lot of other things going on there. Feminine mistreated. And I think that the days as far as the sexual misconduct of which I'm speaking are done. I think that we're moving into a higher consciousness of this, of which we can't abuse and take advantage of people that can't fight back. So with that, I'm going to hand it back over to you to see what you have, and then I'll dig into her a little deeper.
Right. Thank you so much. That was wonderful. So, Hekate. Most of this information tonight is going to be coming from a book called Hekate, Liminal Rites by Sarita D'Este and David Rankine. The following is just a brief synopsis of her major roles. Known as a liminal goddess, present at all boundaries and transitional moments in life, this is why she is associated with the crossroads, gates, and keys. She possesses the keys to the underworld. She's a ruler of Tartarus, the hell-like portion of the Greek underworld, and she decides who goes either there or to the Elysian Fields, the paradise section of the underworld. And you just mentioned her, there's like a moral side to her, especially with the recent Sky, known to protect against harm, protector of women, children, the home, the poor, or the defenseless in general. She played a critical role in the myth of Persephone's abduction and the mysteries of Eleusis that we're going to get to tonight. Her most common titles, and these are translated from Greek because those were some pretty challenging Greek words, mouthful: Earthly One, Torchbearer, Of the Ways, Key Bearer, Child's Nurse, Light Bearer, Companion, Before the Gate, Savior, Three Bodies, Of the Three Ways. And she has many, 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 many titles. Those are just the most common ones. Some about some of the animals that are attributed to her, specifically lions and dogs. Quote from Hekate Liminal Rites: in a Chaldean oracle, Hekate is described as being lion-possessing, and says, if you call upon me often, you will perceive everything in lion form. And I thought that was just an interesting bit that I haven't heard before. And of course, Hekate, she's also heavily associated with dogs. She's said to be extremely loyal like dogs, like she is to Persephone. And I know you said tonight, your dogs decided they were going to join you. Of course they did.
You know what else happened? It's crazy, and I didn't get it until I listened to the playback the other day. But my full moon and Leo video that I did and uploaded, I'm out in the studio, and sure enough, there's a dog barking almost the whole time, faintly in the background, just barking. And barking. There's a guy, I don't know if he was out way there with a bunch of dogs, but I had heard a bunch of beagles. Maybe they were hunting or something. But one of them would not stop barking. And I thought, man, what is going on? Anyway, it picked up. And I was sitting there when I got to my deeper study of her and came across the animals and the dogs and all that stuff and how she turned people into animals.
Right.
Like the whole cat. But
that's pretty common
in the dogs. And, yeah. Like, what
it's also, something interesting that, a lot of people following Hekate don't necessarily like to hear because they tend to be on the a lot of them are vegetarian. Dogs were often sacrificed to her. But the thing, you gotta realize they're thinking. And of course, maybe, could be the way it actually is when you sacrifice a dog to her, that's Hekate's dog now. That's dog heaven, basically. And that dog gets to, live eternally as Hekate's hound now. But, most people would just feel wrong about, killing dogs now. It's just a different sensibility. I mean, human life was valued way less back then. But, it's just the evolution of human morality and the way we feel about things. So, continuing some more basic information. Quote from Liminal Rights. Over time, some goddesses were partially or fully assimilated into Hekate. These were Brimo, Desponia, Enodia, Genitilis, Cotis, Cratade, and Chorotrophos. She was syncretized or equated to Artemis, Selene, Men, Persephone, Physis, Bendis, Bonadea, Diana, Ereshkigal, and Isis. And isn't there an angel by a similar name to Ereshkigal? Or maybe I'm just thinking of Ezekiel. But I don't know. I thought maybe there was something similar that rung a bell. I thought maybe you would know because you know more about the Bible stuff.
What was the name?
Ereschgigal. Ereschgigal.
Well, if it's in there, that's definitely Old Testament. It's definitely, and I would guess the Pentateuch, first 5 books. I wouldn't put it past there. I could be wrong. It could be in a minor prophet.
What's interesting about Hekate is that she was portrayed as multiple animal heads. She was portrayed as an animal more than any other Greek god, and the idea is this demonstrates her connection to primal forces. So I'm just going to read a little bit about her multiple appearances. So cow-headed, bull-headed. The Pity's spell of attraction in the Greek magical papyri, and I should mention now I'm reading from Hekate, Liminal Rights, Sarita Deeste, and David Rankine. Pity's spell of attraction in the Greek magical papyri included a 3-formed Hekate drawn on a flax leaf with cow, maiden, and dog heads. In this category, we must also include the image of bull-headed Hekate. In the prayer to Selene for any spell, she was described as, O night bellower, lover of solitude, bull-faced and bull-headed one, and bull-eyed, horned, and mother of gods and men. John Lytus, in his work Liber de Mensibus, described Hekate as being 4-headed, with one of these heads being the head of a bull, which snorts like some bellowing spirit and is raised towards the sphere of air. I mean, that's interesting, though, because, I would think of Taurus the bull, which is Earth, but, sometimes these things change.
No, I've actually got that in my notes. I'm going to cover that whole Taurus theme, and I tie that in when I look at the last sky here that I want to pull in tonight. She definitely is tied to Taurus. There's a lot to do with the bulls.
So the Taurus used to be air?
Taurus and the bulls. No, she's tied into the imagery of the bull.
Okay, well...
Which ties us to Taurus.
Well, I'll be happy for you to educate us on that.
Yeah, it's in my notes. I'll hit it.
Yes,
so you keep going, man.
They're going to be dog-headed. The prayer to Selene for any spell in the Greek magical papyri included a charm made from lodestone with a 3-formed Hekate with dog, horned maiden, and goat heads. And the pity spell of attraction also included a 3-formed Hekate with dog head. John Lytus, Liber de Mensibus, described one of her 4 heads as being that of a dog, as having a punishing and avenging nature, is raised towards the sphere of earth. You might see a pattern here. You're probably going to see where this is going. Mm-hmm. Interesting. The 10th century, this is dragon-headed now. The 10th century Byzantine encyclopedia on the Suda paraphrased Pseudo-Nonos commentaries on the orations of Gregory Nazianzenus, describing Hekate thus. Some say that she is Artemis, others the moon, appearing in strange manifestations for those invoking curses. Her manifestations are humans with the heads of dragons and of immense size, so that the sight stupefies those who see it. The late description united in a dragon imagery associated with Medea as the steeds pulling her chariot, and some of the tales with the immense size associated with Hekate in stories like Lucian's Philopseudes, where she was also described as having dragon's feet. And continues on, goat-headed. Prayer to Selene, a lodestone charm described depicting a three-formed Hekate with dog, horn maiden, and goat head. The goat was one of the animals named in the list of Hekate in the prayer given in the Greek magical papyri. And it goes on. Horse-headed, serpent-headed, which is notable. She is more associated with snakes, probably more than... That's probably one of the top two. Many of her descriptions in the Greek magical papyrus and spells relating to her described her with snakes. And as we continue, these last two elements, the Chaldean oracles included a serpentine reference to Hekate, which said of her, the she-serpent, and the snake-girdled, others calling her on account of her appearance, girt in serpent coils. As the Hydra was a multiple snake-headed being, we should also mention John Letus Liber de Mentibus, which described one of her foreheads being the head of a hydra as being of a sharp and unstable nature raised towards the sphere of water. And about being horse-headed, again, de Mentibus described one of her foreheads as being the fire-breathing head of a horse is clearly raised towards the sphere of fire. So she's a bit of everything. Clearly she's all four elements. One of her many roles and ideas associated with her is, she's the world soul. Basically she's everything. It seems like the greater divine feminine, more closely related to Binah, and actually we'll get to that a little later. So, of course, we've mentioned Persephone's abduction before. This is going to be the most long form we've ever gotten into that myth. It won't be too long, of course, but this will flesh out many of the details that are often left out in the main synopsis, which Hekate plays a big role in. So I'll try to read this fast. Hades was lonely in his role as the underworld god and made an agreement with his brother Zeus, the ruler of the gods. Hades would abduct his daughter, Persephone, and make her his bride. To do this, he created the beautiful narcissus flower as a lure for her, and the earth goddess Gaia grew it as a favor to him. When Persephone was out picking flowers with some of the other maiden goddesses, including Athena and Artemis, on the plain of Nysa, she spotted the narcissus and wandered off to pick it. Seizing the moment, Hades came out of the earth in his chariot and abducted Persephone, taking her back into the underworld. The only witnesses were Hekate, who heard the struggle from her cave, and Helios, the sun god, who saw it all from the sky. Persephone called out to her mother from the underworld, and Demeter searched the earth unsuccessfully for 9 days looking for her daughter. On the 10th day, Hekate approached her and told her what she heard of the struggle, and suggested they speak to Helios. Helios recounted the whole scene, including informing her that Zeus was responsible for the abduction, but tried to persuade Demeter it was a good match for her daughter. Demeter was inconsolable and wandered the earth, ending up at Eleusis, where she took the role of nursemaid to Queen Metanira's son Demophon, disguised as an old woman. Demeter would not eat or drink until Princess Iambe made her laugh by telling her obscene jokes, and Metanira offered her honeyed wine, but she refused it. Instead, she told Metanira to mix barley, water, and pennyroyal, and make the drink kukion, which she drank. Demeter nourished the baby prince Demophon, feeding him on ambrosia and placing him in the flames of the fire every night to make him immortal. One night, Queen Metanira saw this and shrieked in horror, disturbing Demeter. Demeter revealed her divinity and chastised her, saying that Demophon would now be like any other mortal human. She instructed the queen to build a temple to her, and that her rites, the Eleusinian mysteries, would be celebrated there. When the temple was built, Demeter took up residence in it, and prevented anything from growing for the year, so there were no crops and humanity suffered terribly. From Olympus, Zeus saw the suffering of humanity, and set Iris, the messenger of the gods, to summon Demeter. Demeter ignored the summons and all the other gods who came to her offering gifts to return to Olympus, saying she would not move until she had her daughter back, and neither would the crops grow again. Zeus then sent Hermes to negotiate with Hades for the return of Persephone. However, Hades persuaded Persephone to eat a few pomegranate seeds, binding her to the underworld. Persephone was reunited with her mother, and they rejoiced. Hekate joined them and welcomed Persephone back, and from that time she became her guide, her title in Greek Propolos, on her annual journey to and from the Greek underworld. For Zeus ordered that, due to the pomegranate seeds she had eaten, she now was constrained to spend 1/3 of the year in the underworld and with her husband Hades, and the other 2/3 with her mother Demeter. That is why the earth was barren for 1/3 of the year, as Demeter mourned for the time her daughter was in the underworld away from her. Okay, so now we're going to get into a bit of thoughts about why Hekate's role is significantly. Yep.
Demeter, incidentally, is Ceres.
Yes. Okay. And I should note that synopsis was from Hekate, Liminal Rights, and I will continue reading from it. It is significant that during the abduction, only Hekate and Helios were aware that anything was happening. So not only did Hekate hear a distant struggle when none of the other gods did, indicating a keener perception of unseen events, but her connection to the seen and unseen paths of nature was implied by her being the one who keeps in mind the vigor of nature, which is a direct quote from Homer. Thus, when describing the cries of Persephone during her abduction, the Homeric hymn said, this is a quote from directly from the myth of Homer, "But not one of the immortal ones, or of human mortals, heard her voice. Not even the olive trees which bear their splendid harvest, except for the daughter of Perseus, the one who keeps in mind the vigor of nature. She heard it from her cave. She is Hekate with her splendid headband." Right? So keep in mind, all her depictions of being animal-headed meant to show a connection with primal energy, primal nature. She's so connected with nature. Her and Helios, the sun and the moon, are the only thing that witnessed it. So, continuing. Another interesting point made by the scholar Athanasakis, you're going to have to deal with that, in his translation of the Homeric hymn, was that there could have been an early reference to the association between Hekate and the moon. He claimed this was implied by the line, "But when the 10th light-bringing dawn came to her, Hekate, carrying a light in her hands, met her." Okay, so this last little bit, I'm almost done with this part. The Orphic version of the hymn had some interesting and relevant variations to the Homeric hymn. So there are two different versions, Homer's version and the Orphic version. Instead of Persephone being abducted on the plain of Nysa, she was abducted at Eleusis. Nysa was the name of more than one place, and significantly, there was a plain of Nysa near the city of Lagina where Hekate was worshipped, and also a mountain called Nysa, which was the birthplace of the god Dionysus, who also plays a role. So, more on Hekate in this myth. Rather than Princess Iambe telling her lewd jokes, in the Orphic version, it was the old woman Balbo who made Demeter laugh by showing the goddess her genitals and gave her koukion. So I guess that's just some girl bonding.
Yeah, it's crazy.
Balbo was also associated with Hekate as an alternative name or companion, as mentioned in the Orphica, and also on a Defixio curse tablet from Claudiopolis, which linked Balbo Hekate to Artemis and Ereshkigal. We may speculate as to whether the Balbo images of the woman displaying her genitalia reappeared many centuries later in the medieval Sheila na gig figures found carved around the churches in Europe.
Interesting.
So this last bit on her role going forward in Persephone's recurrent journey. In the telling of the Homeric hymn to Demeter, Hekate embraced Persephone and was described as being the preceder and follower of Persephone. This significantly referred to her position, not a role. Hekate preceded Persephone into the underworld and followed her out of the underworld. In this way, she stood between her and any danger. Although Persephone assumed her role as of Chthonian queen of the dead during her third of the year in the underworld, For her other two-thirds, she was once again the gentle, nurturing goddess walking the surface of the earth. Persephone was in this aspect for her journeys to and from the underworld, and Hekate acted as her guardian as well as guide. And that's all I will say about that myth. I know that part was a little bit long, but I feel one of the best ways to understand the goddess is to, or any goddess really, is to understand their role in myths.
I really appreciate you bringing it in, and it isn't conversation that's table talk or, you know, something that people are talking a lot about because it's kind of portrayed only in certain classrooms across America or libraries in certain places. It's not just common information. Usually these stories aren't scattered around anymore, so they're good to hear, and they're good to know that we're not just kind of imagining this, that this archetype is real and it's out there somewhere.
Hekate is associated modernly with so many different forms of magic. Well, not even modernly, anciently too, because of all the spells, the Greek magical papyrus and so forth. Of course, she's associated with the underworld.
There goes your bowls and your bells and your stuff over there you're hitting.
Oh, that was my mic stand.
Into the cave.
Nope.
We're going into the cave of Hekate, is what it sounded like, man.
So,
right.
one of the things she's most associated with is oracles, divination. And there was a pretty significant bit of divination done by an oracle of Hekate that was recorded by Porphyry, I think that's how you say it, who was basically a philosopher in the 3rd century CE. And he asked an oracle of Hekate about Jesus. And he was an anti-Christian theologian. So this is what the oracle of Hekate had to say about Jesus. And this Porphyry was very widely, well, not very widely read, but he was well read enough to be significant to solidify Hekate being associated with divination. So, this is what she said. And to those who ask why he, Jesus, was condemned to die, the oracle of the goddess Hekate replied, "The body, indeed, is always exposed to torments, but the souls of the pious abide in heaven. And the soul you inquire about has been the fatal cause of error to other souls which were not fated to receive the gifts of the gods, and to have the knowledge of immortal Jove. Such souls are therefore hated by the gods, for they who were fated not to receive the gifts of the gods and not to know God were fated to be involved in error by means of him you speak of. He himself, however, was good, and heaven has been opened to him as to other good men. You are not, then, to speak evil of him, but to pity the folly of men, and through him men's danger is imminent."
Well, I've never heard that before.
So, I mean, I'd be lying if I said I understood the whole thing clearly, but what I got from it is that, I mean, she's saying Jesus is essentially good, but because of the folly of men, people are in danger because of him. Basically, I mean, obviously I see what came forth from that. The church that came up around him was essentially evil, and they murdered and tortured people in his name.
That's a fact. If you go by the history that we know and have, religion has been the cause of more wars than anything. If we look at the religious wars and the reasons for fighting, it's true. It's true. And I don't think that's what he was about.
No, of course not. He was basically a communist hippie by today's fucking standards.
Yeah.
Anyway, so Hekate was also associated with, I'm just going to go into a couple of the various magical areas she's associated with. Herbs and poisons. Of quote from the same book, Hekate Liminal writes, Hekate was often referred to as being closely associated with plants of death, such as poisonous herbs and funeral plants. Likewise, her priestesses or daughters, Medea and Circe, were particularly associated with pharmakia, the magic of herbs, drugs, and poison. However, despite long lists presented in many modern pagan works, there is little historical evidence from ancient Greek and Rome beyond what is given below of connections between Hekate and specific plants. Many modern attributions seem to be plants connected with death or having psychoactive property, the so-called hexing herbs. This does not invalidate the connection, it merely makes it a recent addition rather than one with an ancient provenance. So the traditional herbs associated with her are aconite, ebony, garlic, mandrake, oak, saffron, and yew. And yeah, I remember there was a book I saw, Hekate's Garden. It gets all into herbs and Hekate.
That's crazy. I'm online as you say that. I'm online looking for the name of that book, and you just said it as I found it.
Well, there you go.
It is Hekate's Garden by Cindy Brennan. She also does the Keeping Her Keys YouTube channel, and she has Keeping Her Keys, an introduction to Hekate, and then Hekate's Garden. So I plan on going through her books.
Right. And another Hekate-based practice book that I recommend is called The Temple of Hekate. And almost every aspect of a magical practice you can think of, there is some way to do it regarding Hekate. And I'll just read some of the table of contents here. The altar, statuary, it's basically blessing a statue with her, purification, making a robe, ritual gestures, sacred vows, incense, banishing ritual, creating sacred space, not magic and phylacteries, the magic, wand, psychic development, the elements, oracles and divination, tarot cards. She relates every single deck in the tarot card to Hekate because she's the world soul, therefore you can. Hymns, mantras, evocations, invocations, ritual planning and performance, the night battle ritual. So much. So that is The Temple of Hekate by Tara Sanchez.
Yep, looking at it right now. Yep,
that
you have it on Amazon,
there's a lot of original stuff from her in there, and there's also spells and rituals from the Greek magical papyrus. My preferred banishing ritual I learned from that book. That's from the Greek magical papyrus. Invokes Hekate and Helios, the Eyes of Heaven banishing ritual. And I like it because basically you're banishing by the power of the sun and the moon. You're not invoking angels or anything like that. So that's much more to my tastes. So continuing, of course, because Hekate was so underworld associated, being keeper of the keys to Tartarus and to the Elysian fields and deciding who goes where naturally, she was associated with necromancy. So in the real world, necromancy is communication with the dead, not, reanimation, like you might think. Although there are fictional accounts of reanimation involving Hekate, but it's just, in fiction anyway. So she is associated with the communication of the dead. I'm just going to read a little bit about that from the book. Necromancy deals with communication between the living and the dead and crosses the liminal barrier of death. As such, it is a form of magic which has been specifically associated with Hekate and other underworld deities. Hekate, as the queen of the restless dead, was particularly appropriate to call upon, as the restless dead were the type most often called upon for assistance in magic. In this, the Greeks continued the Egyptian tradition of calling on the dead for assistance with spells due to their greater level of personal magical power. And the material is out there if you wish to conduct magic in this way, if that is what you're called to, which is what there's so much interesting shit in the world. I fucking love it.
Yeah, it is quite fascinating. I tend to look at things from the whole scientific perspective. When I went to look at the tarot, I was going to try to disprove it, that and astrology. And that is a true story. I was like, there's no way with my programming I had in my brain at that time. There was no way that I could ever wrap my head around those being good, but it was my ignorance that made those decisions. It wasn't built on actual knowledge of understanding it. It was built on ignorance, and I had to face that, and that's been part of my growth in the last 10 years is unlearning things, you know.
Mm-hmm. So with all these associations with the underworld and the dead, what do you think, a Christian culture is going to think of her?
Well, what's really great is Cindy goes into that in her books, and she talks about this on her videos on YouTube as well. And she really hits this hard, and she talks about how that all happened, and she got bastardized.
Right, I'm about to read a little bit about it right now. This is from the True Grimoire by Jake Stratton Kent, and this is from a chapter on Asteroth, and a subchapter in that talks about Hekate and Asteroth as to how they are, Asteroth is basically a demonized form of Hekate, and we'll get into all that. So, it's from the True Grimoire. She participated actively, Hekate, in search for Demeter's daughter, Persephone, after her abduction by Hades, and became her constant companion upon her discovery. This mythic connection strongly reinforced her connection with the realm of the dead, which in time eroded her more positive associations, as generally occurs with chthonic figures under the influence of more quote-unquote civilized religions. Thus, the Gnostic Christian text, the Pistis Sophia, she is spoken of as follows. The third order is called triple-faced Hekate, and there are under her authority 27 archdemons, and it is they which enter into men and seduce them to perjuries and lies, and do covet that which does not belong to them. The souls then which Hekate beareth hence in ravishment, she handeth over to her demons which stand under her, and in order that they may torment them through her dark smoke and wicked fire. They begin exceedingly afflicted through demons, and they spend 105 years and 6 months being chastised in her wicked chastisements, and they begin to be dissolved and destroyed. So that is her view of the Gnostics. So why do I bring this up at all? I think we could still learn more about her even through this darker side. And this chapter, actually, I did learn. Some people, I don't know, maybe may have been piqued by this number, 105 years and 6 months. Well, it's not exactly the same, but it's so close to 156, which is Babylon's number, who represents Binah, the Divine Mother. So if you remember back to our Kabbalistic episodes.
Yep.
And in this description of her in the Chaldean oracles of Zoroaster, she seems even more Binah-like. So continuing from the True Grimoire, the Chaldean oracles of Zoroaster are probably Greco-Egyptian in origin, but influenced by hermetically inspired Zervanist Chaldean sources. In their deeply philosophical magical cosmology, Hekate's role of divine intermediary was developed into the utmost extent. The oracles portray Hekate filled with and dispensing the life-giving fire. This is quote directly from the Chaldean oracles of Zoroaster. The life-bearing fire filleth the life-producing bosom of Hekate. She, having first received the powers of all things in her ineffable bosom, pours forth perpetual generation on all things. So this sounds exactly like Binah to me, the greater divine feminine. The, filling with fire, basically the reception, if we remember to Binah, the divine feminine is the ultimate receptivity. She's, her symbol is the cup, it's built to hold things. So she's holding the life-bearing fire, that's holding the life, that's like an image of a pregnant woman, and then she passes it on. I mean, that's Kabbalistic emanation theory. All the emanations basically the spheres emanate into each other. It's the same energy basically going through these pit stops in basically these checkpoints in the development of the universe. And it's held, the energy, it's received from the sphere before, but of course Binah is especially receiving because that's her essence. And then she pours forward to down the rest of the tree. So the reason why I've had trouble working with Hekate is because I already work with Babylon, and they are so similar to me, it's hard for me to see them apart at all. And especially because Hekate, her role is helping people back and forth across the abyss. It's Persephone in the myth, but it's you if you were in the Temple of Eleusis. It's you if you've experienced that psychedelic death. And in the Thelemic myth, which was invented, but it's still interesting, I guess it's all invented to an extent. Babylon helps the initiate across the abyss. I mean, it's all the same. So, anyway, I just thought that really shed light on deep aspects about her. And I thought this was really interesting that this came up in this chapter, and the timing has been great for this podcast, the whole time. The origin of Valentine's Day in this chapter on Asteroth and Hekate. So I'm just going to read this paragraph real quick. Much of the number and star lore of Gnosticism also originates in the systems of Babylon and Chaldea. There, too, a central feature of the Gnostic sects derives. The mystical marriage of Sophia and her heavenly bridegroom is a direct descendant of the union of Ishtar and Tammuz, recreated on earth by priests and priestesses in a shrine known as the bridal chamber. To the Sumerians and the cultures immediately descended from them, this ritual was an assurance of life through fertility of the crops in herds. It may certainly have had a more esoteric significance among the initiates of Chaldea and Babylonia prior to the Gnostics, but whether or not it did so, with the Gnostics it was an assurance not of fertility, but of salvation, of return to the celestial source of life. This rite was enacted by Valentinian Gnostics on the 14th of February. So potent was this rite's appeal that the Church had to invent a Saint Valentine martyred on that day to combat its influence. Accordingly, Saint Valentine's Day is a testament to the influence of Gnosticism and of Asteroth that has survived for centuries. It is striking, too, that Sophia, the Gnostic deity of wisdom, possesses several qualities originating with Ishtar or Asteroth, divine harlot not least among them.
There you go. How timely is that you ran across that?
Yeah, the timing for everything, there's been a lot of synchronicities around this podcast. It's kind of interesting. So here's how exactly Hekate is nearly identical with the demon queen Asteroth, and I'll get to her description in a little bit in case it piques your interest. In many respects, quoting now from the True Grimoire, Jake Stratton-Kent, in many respects, the nature of Asteroth as developed in the magical traditions is similar or identical with that of the goddess Hekate. There is, to be sure, a gulf between some portrayals of Inanna or Ishtar, who in some forms resembles a headstrong and selfish young aristocrat, and Hekate, whose empathy with the marginalized and defenseless is abiding. However, Hekate's positive qualities are not absent from portrayals of Astarte as intercessor, protectress, and dispenser of justice. Not only was Hekate similar in nature and origin to Astarte, but whether in the ancient period or more recently, they have also developed very similar roles in magic. They are often invoked at crossroads. They command numerous spirits. They are both associated with Cerberus, aka Nibiros. They both have a lunar nature. The lion and the horse belong to them both, and the pole or pillar is their common symbol. Given the ancient connection drawn between Hekate and Artemis on the one hand, and Artemis and Astarte on the other, a similar linkage of Hekate and Asteroth is in magical tradition, with one name giving way to the other, is unsurprising. This connection may be perceived at work in the Testament of Solomon. Here, the bonds of Artemis are predicted by the seventh of the Pleiades, presumably Alcyone, to be the cause of Solomon's ultimate downfall. Similarly, in the Bible, it is Astaroth whose worship supposedly leads to Solomon's fall. 1 Kings 2, 6. This is a biblical quote for that. While in the magical papyri contemporary with the Testament, Artemis is fully identified with Hekate. In the same text speaks of sinister events at the crossroads, using terms that may easily refer to Hekate, such as her title Enodia. It is a notable fact that an amulet of the Roman period was discovered at a crossroads in Ostia, depicting on the one side King Solomon stirring a magical cauldron, and on the other a triple-bodied form of Hekate, both figures surrounded by the magical symbols, which of some are recognizable in Solomonic grimoires. So there, of course, with King Solomon, she's associated with spirit conjuring. But
hey,
yeah,
can you quote the author of that again, that which you just shared, because that cut out when you first started, and we want to make sure we give credit to wherever that was from, please.
Yes, sorry. Yes, that was from the True Grimoire by Jake Stratton Kent about Astaroth. Astaroth is a spirit of the True Grimoire and one of the 3 chiefs of the spirits. In the system of the True Grimoire, Astaroth shares rule over the world with Lucifer and Beelzebub. In this division, Lucifer rules Europe and Asia, Beelzebub Africa, and Astaroth the Americas. In supposedly traditional systems of demonology, Astaroth is often seen as male. This is something which will be discussed later. For our immediate purposes, Astaroth is considered as similar to, if not identical with, a goddess of the pagan Canaanites and others known as Astarte, and associated with Venus and the moon. Like I just mentioned, sometimes Astaroth appears as male, but for all intents and purposes, everything in the myth is congruent to Hekate, and also many practitioners report interacting with Astaroth as a female connection. So interestingly enough, Jake Stratton Kent describes how similar Hekate and Hermes are. Okay, this is in the magical fusion of ideas concerning Hekate as goddess of the crossroad and Hermes as god thereof. In the magical papyri, and indeed long before, a marked sharing of attributes can be seen between these messenger deities, so that, for example, Hekate was portrayed with the caduceus wand of Hermes. This was in fact a long-established feature of Greek mythology, and the mystery cults from which much of the magic of the papyri is derived, for example, of that of the Idaean dactyls. In addition, the magical name Hermekate in combination of their names appears in the papyri. Given this near interchangeable quality, it is not unlikely that a flexibility of gender resulted. This may, in turn, have complicated the partial picture resulting from the decline of the magical tradition and the loss of much of its original lore. So, why do I bring up the darkest part of Hekate, and that part of her has essentially been demonized, turned into a demon queen? Well, that's because I just wanted to have the discussion about dark and light and good and evil, because it is silly to kind of view the world through the lens of good and evil. Really, it's all perception. I mean, how can Hekate be a protector of women and children and the defenseless if she has no means of protecting them? I mean, most people understand that, bears aren't evil, but if you are being mauled by a bear, and a bear is doing everything it can to eat you alive, for your all your intensive purposes, practically to you, yes, that bear is a demon in that moment. But step outside of yourself and look at things objectively. Who understand things aren't mad at the bear. They don't think the bear is morally wrong in eating its prey alive. It's killing and all that. It's just doing what bears do, and it has a place. Bears serve a function in nature, and that's what many of the darker sides of these gods and goddesses, and what some call demons and all that. I don't think dark equals evil and light equals good. I mean, too much light is a bad thing. Too much well-being is a bad thing. The well-being makes you stagnant. Well-being doesn't force you to grow. I mean, the darkness is where all the growth happens. I mean, challenges aren't all love and light, but, challenges are what forces you to evolve. Too much light is a bad thing. Not enough darkness is a bad thing. You need balance.
Well said.
And that is what I have.
We must allow the expressions to be unfettered and free, both now and going forward, within balance and harmony for all, and that includes all spectrum, duality, nature, and getting that straight and understanding it. I appreciate your thoughts on that. That was very interesting. Thank you so much for sharing that with us.
No problem.
All right. Hekate is the 100th asteroid to be discovered. So where we had last week the first 4 in the early 1800s, Hekate was discovered July 11th, 1868. And she was discovered by James Craig Watson, although, and I'm sorry I don't have this guy's full name, I lost it in my research, I apologize, but it's out there. There's stories that have Watson's discovery as debatable. And they state that a man whose last name is Wolf, I believe, Wolf is in his name somewhere, that he actually discovered it first, but it wasn't reported. It was reported by this other guy. So, at any rate, it's attributed to July 11th, the 100th asteroid to be discovered, and her orbit is 1,982 days, or 5.4
Wait, you say she was the 100th asteroid? Well, they could have done this on purpose, but Heka, it means 100.
Excellent. I'm going to go into that. That's in my notes.
Oh, I'm sorry.
No,
I'm sorry.
I think it's awesome. No, man. I think it's awesome. It shows that we're on the same page.
Okay.
I literally have that written down in front of me in a minute. I appreciate it. Anytime, man. Bring that in because we need all of it. So she spends about 6 months in each sign. That's pretty significant. That's a half a year. That's a lesson. That's something wanting to be spoken and said. She's considered a large main belt asteroid. She's an S-type asteroid, and these asteroids with a spectral type are indicative of a silicous, which it says i.e. stony, mineralogical composition, hence the name. They have relatively high density, and there's approximately 17% of the asteroids are of this type, making it the second most common after the carbonaceous. So I just wanted to give that background about her up in the astronomy sky and when she was discovered. Now, the mythology, a lot of what you said, she's a goddess of witchcraft in Greek mythology, but her name also commemorates it as the 100th asteroid, as Hekaton in Greek for hundreds. Her orbit is the outer main asteroid belt between Mars and Jupiter. Okay, so she's located in the same region as Hygeia, which I identify with and we talk about in our podcast. She's come up over and over, and here she is again. She's part of the asteroid family. Now, in the past 5 years, like I have said, I think Hekate has seemed to really step to the forefront. And I see her represented on social media. I know you do in the places that I listed.
Well, I'm not on there anymore.
Well, good for you.
Yeah.
Right.
I'm sorry, continue.
Yeah. So,
humans.
Yeah, I know. I probably will eventually completely get off.
As long as you're not mindlessly scrolling.
No,
mindlessly scrolling is the worst thing.
I know.
That's how it harvests the energy.
It harvests the energy. Oh, see, we need to go into this. Let's have a talk about social media. Let's do it, because I actually want to do one of my papers on this for school, how cell phones, because there's so much to be said about social media, but cell phones in general, the invention of cell phones and how it's changed family dynamics, and then, of course, the family dynamics of interrelating. How am I going to measure that? So anyway, I'm fascinated by that whole subject, but let me continue with. So although her messages may be new to us, they're certainly not new to our Earth and our forefathers, and I thank you so much for bringing in places that she showed up. And, it's been suggested, I came across when I was studying her, that she was snuffed out and repressed due to the heavy hand of a patriarchal society, just like the other feminine expressions. You can actually see how this happened in certain pockets. It's fascinating. I'm starting to study this, but it is directly tied to the invention of language, and that's just an incredible story. We didn't have time for it, but it's out there under Keeping Her Keys. Follow her, you'll run into it. But they saw her confidence and independence as a threat, and you can see how these things were snuffed out. And she's seen in many cultures around the globe through mythology writings, but she's in other cultures too, and I'm going to name some of her names as she shows up. She's in scrolls and hymns and epitaphs and storytellers tell of her, and she's been called the Triple Moon Goddess, Maiden, Mother, Crone, 3 stages of a woman's life, Queen of the Crossroads, Queen of the Witches and Witchcraft, Patron of Women, the Great Mother, Mother of all signs, Mother of Witches, Mother of Souls, Mother of World Souls, the Dark Mother, Soul of the World, Artemis, Selene, Hekate, Dark Moon Goddess, Goddess of the Crossroads, Mistress of Magic, Walker between Worlds, Shaman, Wise Woman, Queen, Savior, World Soul, and over 100 other names. She was the daughter of the Titan god of destruction, Perseus, and her mother is Astrea. She was the only Titan to retain her counsel under Zeus's reign, and you alluded to that earlier. So her powers transcended the boundaries of the sky, the earth, and the seas, and the underworld, and that was out of Hesiod's Theogony. You kind of alluded to some of that as well. This ties her to the zodiac signs of Cancer, the mother archetype, and also to Scorpio. We have the underworld represented here through Pluto, god of the underworld, Hades, and the duality of humanity, which is exactly what you were just talking about. This is the psyche, the 8th house, the shadows, the house of transmutation, the house of transformation, the house of transcendence, so we can go up and out into the 9th. It's the shadow work that needs to be done. It is the cutting of the cords, the cutting of the umbilical cords to things that no longer serve us. It's growth, maturity, healing, deep, deep healing from traumas, especially the dark, dark things. That which is in urgent need of light, where our magic resides. Rumi said, the wound is where your light is. Yes, he did say this. She's an intercessor for children, especially protector of the oppressed, the poor, the hurting. You can see her in stories where she comes through as any one of those types of expressions. I also have the Chaldean oracles, the Enemu Mundi. I don't know if you're familiar with that, but she shows up there, and she's often pictured with 3 heads looking in 3 different directions for past, present, and the future. Her symbols are keys, and she owns the ultimate skeleton key, the key that is said to unlock any of the realms. So I find that fascinating. I have in my journal as proof when I was microdosing and working with plant medicine, who Hekate is very much involved with. And I was just journaling and expressing and working my way through things. And I wrote and drew one day in my journal, look for the keys. Find the keys that open the doors. Find the keys that open the sacred doors that you need to walk through. Find the keys. And I didn't know what that meant. This was years ago. And then I find out that I was born with a 26-degree Hekate sun and a 26-degree Cancer sun in the 9th house. That's powerful. And it's a responsibility, anyone, I think, who's born with her that close to your sun or your ascendant or your moon. Check your charts, because she wants to express herself in a little bit of a different way, and there's also different challenges with that. And before I go further, I want to say, Anthony, your Hekate is in your 3rd house in Virgo. So what you just did this evening represents a Hekate 3rd house. Let's start with the house that you were visiting, which we must, because you're not home. You're visiting. Hekate is Scorpio, 8th house or 4th house. Either place there, she's pretty comfortable. But she's in the 3rd house of Gemini. Gemini is mutable air energy. She's a talker. Gemini's back and forth talk. Right now, across the state borders, that's Gemini. Further distance would be the 9th house. But this is the teacher every day in the classroom teaching, the talking, the communication between family and friends. Short distance travels. So we're not too far from each other. That's considered a short distance. Now, what else do you have in that house? You have her conjunct a Virgo Venus in your 3rd house. So there's a mission there. 1 degree, 2 degree. That's definitely something that we can talk off grid, but there's something there to be seen. She's active through Venus communication. Venus ties to what? Taurus, 2nd house, and Libra, 7th house. So she's going to have those expressions of concern. And in the 3rd house in Virgo, she's going to have that as her container. She's not going to come through as a Gemini, but what you have going for you there, Gemini, her lord is, his lord, rather, it's masculine energy, is Mercury. And Virgo's planet is Mercury, correct? And Mercury is in the 3rd house in Virgo. Close analytical study and look in a Virgoic way of the themes that you have going on in the 3rd house. And your part of Fortune is there, which we haven't even talked about ever. And Hekate is there with Venus. So yeah, you definitely are doing what this podcast is right now. This is day-to-day communications. It's right there. That's pretty exciting to see that.
Oh, yeah.
Because you are a Cancer sun, a Cancer ascendant, and I'm a Cancer sun. And the moon is in Cancer tonight, moving into Leo real quick, okay, but it's in 23 degrees Cancer. So you've got someone who operates in Cancer energy and her sun and her moon, because I'm a Cancer moon too, and you're a Cancer ascendant and your moon is in your ascendant house, and there's a Cancer moon tonight. So we were destined to talk about Hekate because she's sitting on the very top of the chart tonight in Aries at 26 degrees, saying, speak. And she's in the 9th house of higher mind and not religion. It can be there, but it's more spirituality versus religion, I see, and not versus, but an upgrading from just religion to a more spiritual way of being is the 9th house. And she's sitting right there in Aries, in that house tonight. So, all right, let me continue here a little bit with her. So it ties her to Cancer and Scorpio. I'm going to go into that a little later, but very, very tied to going down to the depths, which is that duality you talked about, and often, like I said, pictured with the 3 heads, her realms where she goes is in need of torches, and this is where we see the torch with her and the light. And the knife, which is representing, she was seen as a midwife often in helping with children and birthing and the mother and all of this. And so the knife was used to cut the umbilical cord, to separate mother from child. Her emblem is a star and the crescent moon. She's identified with snakes because she wants you to shed and get rid of what no longer serves you. Shed your skin over and over. Toads, dragons, cats, and mostly dogs. And that's when I got into the whole dog thing, where I got into all of that. And I was like, wow, there's a lot there with the dogs. It shows up in a lot of places. Mm-hmm. She's the goddess of life, death, regeneration, magic. She rules our choices, victory, and travel. And she's known to have mystical, magical healing gardens with plants and metaphysical healing properties. So, again, back to that book that we talked about in other places, I think you mentioned too, where we see her tied to the plant kingdom in a very beautiful way. And I just am so called to that. I can't even begin to tell you. I feel that very strongly. I am growing all kinds of herbs out here, and it's just been really fun to experiment and bring them in the house and use them as part of my altars and times when I go into just meditation. And yeah, it's really awesome to grow something and work with it. So how does she speak? She speaks through, it appears, visions and dreams and synchronicities. And when she speaks, I think people have asked about this. And I really do believe that. Like, she's not subtle, at least in my experience, at all.
There is a whole procedure in the Temple of Hekate by Tara Sanchez to, attempt to get Hekate to appear to you in a dream incubation.
Okay. To each their own. So she patrols frontiers between life and death, serving as an intermediator between spirits and humans. This is important because this is part of those that are often called to do shadow work, or healers. They feel like they're called to shamanism, and it is a calling. I think it chooses you, and if you're in tune, you have to answer it. It's not something that you can say no to. That's at least been my experience. It's not a bad thing or a good thing. It just is where your spirit says you must go to fulfill your soul, travel here. And this is becoming my experience, which is changing a lot of things in my life and the direction I was going, and what I used to think was so important seems to be falling away. And she came to me at a very, very significant time in my life. And this archetype has been very powerful and assisted me because she is, after all, the mother. And she often is said to work with those that have had mother wounds or seen a mother in trauma. And that certainly was my experience growing up. And so there was a lot there that, because I never dealt with my shadow and I just went to work, and the way that I survived was to achieve and become the best or the top. And my avenue was the financial world. And there I went. And I lost myself in all of that. And I still functioned, but there were triggers. And there were parts of me there that I just never dealt with. And I did have incredible moments of healing through the Christ consciousness that I cannot deny, through what I know to be the Holy Spirit. I cannot deny. I did a whole video on it, my chart that day, and said, look, this is what was going on, and this is what the sky said, and this is what happened to me. And I showed that it was a remarkable day in my life. And it was. And that kind of changed my life, but I never really went in and dealt with the darker parts, because when I went into religion or Christianity, although it was beautiful and it had its place, it never allowed you to go to those places. It wanted you to get on your knees and like pray them out of you, as if they were not a part of you, like something foreign and evil and horror. I don't know how to explain it. It was really a mess. I mean, it was really messed up in my head. And when you talked about duality and you explained the darker parts and how it's not good or evil, when I finally got that, like not good or bad, when I finally understood that, I can't even tell you how freeing that was. And anyone that's been brainwashed through certain types of religion will really understand what I mean by that. When you realize, wow, there's more to this world than what we've been told in these 66 books. There's too much not there. But yet, magically enough, it's encoded. But her scope of divine duties was extensive in ancient Greek religion, and she was most notably the goddess of magic, witchcraft, the night, light, ghosts, necromancy, and the moon, and the protector of entrance ways. So in her form as the triple goddess, she's associated with the crossroads and was portrayed as a liminal goddess who can cross from the underworld to the physical world with ease. You know, there's something to that whole theme about her, where she's going to bring you to this dark, shadowy part of you, because you have to deal with it, because the skin needs to be shed. And if you're not
think of the myth.
Yeah, if you're not willing to go there and look at that and be in that duality and deal with it, Pluto doesn't play, and Pluto's at work through her in Scorpio here, 8th house, Hades, underworld. You know, there's really no escaping this. So she guards the veil between the living and the dead, and originally she led the souls of the dead to the upper worlds. As goddess mythology was demonized over time, her story was corrupted to mean that at night she raised the souls of the dead, no doubt to some witchy mischief. I came across that on leewhitehorse.com. But in her true guise as Queen of the Dead, Hekate reminds us that there is life beyond life and that there is no life without death. So in astrology, her signature is Cancer, so she's tied to the Great Mother, and Scorpio and Pluto to death. So you have the 7 card in the Tarot, the Chariot, Major Arcana. You have 13, the Death card of Scorpio, and you have 20, the card of Transcendence, Judgment card in the Tarot. And then you could also throw in the Moon card and the High Priestess. So in regards to who she is and how she shows up, those are the archetypes that you want to take a look at within those cards. She's the place we go to find out what we need to discern deeply about our lives and our direction. She's all about helping past, present, future. She's on the crossroads, and she's able to do that. This I found interesting when you were talking about the black dogs. I came across this. In the psyche, Hekate represents the boundaries between the known and unknown. With her torches, she throws a light on our shadows and awakens our own demons so we can see them clearly. I find myself singing Nick Drake's song Black-Eyed Dog as I write. Perhaps Hekate's black dogs are reminiscent of the black dog of depression that tends to overcome us when we don't know what to do, when we can't make a choice, when we cower in the face of our own demons, when we are dogged by problems. Hekate holds the key. Through her guidance, we can unlock our own magic. She is the light in the dark, like the snake or serpent that's also attributed to her. Hekate has ancient knowledge. As goddess of the crossroads in between places, Hekate in astrology is connected to our times of transition, and that really is the 8th house. The 8th house is a tough house, and it's a house where our deepest lessons are learned. So she reveals what was once hidden and perhaps what we were afraid to see. But she doesn't stay in the dark for long. She is there when the door behind us has closed and the door ahead of us has yet to open. She is the boundary between what was, what is, and what is yet to come. She is death and rebirth. Hekate is the seer, the fortune teller, the diviner who whispers the truth in your ear that your soul needs to hear. With her kinship to the moon, perhaps she also represents the madness that ensues when we try to ignore our instinctual and emotional responses. An ancient symbol, is Hekate's wheel. Have you heard of this? Hekate's wheel shows 3 serpent types, and it's woven around a center of fire. Basically, this means through self-knowledge and inner wisdom, we are led back to our own light. Hekate teaches us that the true magic lives within us. So It's a very Cancer and asteroid because not only does it have moon symbolism, but Hekate trusts her feelings entirely and gives no credence to logic. This is a highly psychic asteroid. Highly, highly, highly psychic. She knows the way. She knows the way. And this is why I really believe she's been hidden and demonized, like you discussed, and brought to this very dark place so that we would not know the archetypical power that exists there. So I want to share about this Uranus, Taurus, North Node, Taurus thing we have going on in our chart and how that ties a little bit to the bull. And I'm wrapping up here. But in tonight's chart, we have in Taurus, let me say this about Uranus. We have Taurus in Uranus, and we've had that with the square Saturn. If you go back and listen to our podcast, right, you're aware of that, Anthony, just the tension of what's going on with Uranus wanting to bust out and Saturn restricting. And this is what we're still in, and it's slowly moving, but we're still having these aspects occur. So that tensions remain in the outer world. Remember, when we get to these outer planets, it's not as personal. The inner planets we talked about on our planets podcast, but Uranus is out there. This is more cultural, outside of us energies, but they do affect your natal transits and your natal report. You know, you're going to see it in there if you get one of those pulled. So we've got it in Taurus. We know what that means. We've also got that North Node in Taurus that moved a little while ago. So that is in retrograde. And with those two together in Taurus, you're looking at, obviously, Taurus themes. Taurus rules the second house, and Taurus also rules Venus. So these are themes of relating with our money, relating with our resources. We're seeing all these changes, correct? Well, the bull ties into Hekate. And when you look at the Hekate representations of her, it ties to the bull this way. She stands for the Great Mother in all of the seasons and changes that a woman goes through. And when you look at a bull, it looks like fallopian tubes. You've got the bull in the face in the middle.
Oh, shit.
And the horns are the bull's fallopian tubes. When you turn the bull on the side, it represents the crescent moon. So
right, the horns of the bull, the moon.
Yeah,
right,
there's deep history of her and symbolism as great mother goddess tied to the bull, which then, of course, brings us into earthly fixed themes of security and resources. So there's been a theme here that's been wanting to come out. And with Ceres that we talked about, last week, the Great Mother, another strong feminine asteroid of the mother, conjunct the north node in Taurus, stalled there, he stalled out at 00 degrees in the 11th house of Aquarius, others in Gemini. Ceres is talking about Uranian themes. And Uranus is in Taurus, talking about second house themes. And can you see this all works together, where we're really talking about things that need to come out and be said at this time in history.
All I can think when you bring up Uranus and Taurus is the fourth great economic reset, build back better, our rulers are magicians.
Well, I tell you, how is this helpful to know? It's helpful to know because, just like the planets, these asteroid goddesses and other asteroids that are out there carry energetic vibrational energy footprints, and the orbital behaviors impact Earth. They interact with Earth. The way they show up in our charts will reveal where and how these energies want to engage. If you do that, you'll see events have transpired. These energies were very much at work in how they said they would be at that time. And you look at it with a neutral eye, like I did. I just came in, and I was like, okay, I'm just going to look at this as if I've never seen it before, and everything's okay to study about it, and I'm just going to learn. I was amazed as I began to do this. Now, I say that to say this, Hekate is no exception. And when I discovered where she was and how it's unavoidable for me to be talking about her themes, and how I have many other themes with Cancer, the mother, I now see, some of my hardest experiences have been as the mother in relational energies in my life, and I just see how if it weren't for my deeper understanding now, it wouldn't have made sense to me because it would have just seemed so obscure, but it's not. It's like somebody said, no, this piece here fits into this piece, and that piece fit into this piece, and this is why. This is why that and there and this, and I don't think you can get it wrong, is what I'm saying. I think that no matter what, the orbits are going to happen, and the planets are going to tick by, and the asteroids are going to keep going, and really there's no stopping that. We have no control over that. But what we can control are the energies that are available. Control not as in hang on to them and strangle them, but utilize them like a tool. You can't have a hammer, you would know this with the job that you do. You can't have a hammer in your hand and not hold it like a tool. You have to respect it. You have to. The darker themes. There's a necessity here of having to understand all that. But some crystals I wanted to mention as you're working with all of this energy here, if you're looking to go in and understand her more, and she speaks to everyone differently, I would say is moonstone. Excellent stone to work with when you're working with moon and Cancer energies. Labradorite, selenite, and malachite, which I use, is for protection. Definitely not protection as in fearful, oh my God, she's going to hurt me, that's ridiculous. Protection in that you must understand that these energies are of a higher vibration than the 3D Earth. Would you care to comment on that, Anthony, at all?
I've never quite thought about protection in that way, but now that you say it, it makes a lot more sense in the paradigm where we're getting rid of the concepts of good and evil.
Yeah, I mean, it isn't like there are things that I think are necessary. Well, malefic is a word and an archetype, and it needs to come to the table because that word exists. And there are bazillions of stories of malefic entities out there that we could use as a reference. But there's also benefic planets and signatures that we could use as positive. So again, there's duality, and I'm not sure what
Right.
it's going
And I
on.
would say even with the malevolent entities, like they're malevolent to our perspective. Like any predator, like of a regular animal variety, preying upon humans, that's evil in the respect for practicality. If you are concerned with not dying, a predator animal preying on you, you would want to respond to that.
All right, so fluorite is another stone crystal, and smoky quartz, which I'm holding in my hand. I highly recommend a big chunk of smoky quartz. And with that being said, I really want to encourage you. This full moon is powerful coming up here. And if there's anything that you need to stand up in with more courage and being more you, but yet always considering the other in harmony, but where you're willing to bring yourself into in a different way of asserting yourself in regards to matters of home and family and relationships.
You mentioned with this moon, with the asserting yourself in family dynamics, that involves Hekate too, because she is pretty much the only Titan who is revered by the Greeks and by the Olympians. All the other Titans were imprisoned after the Olympians overthrew them, but she participated in the war against the Titans, against her family.
Mm-hmm. Yes, she was for the Olympians, right?
Yep, she fought with the Olympians against the Titans.
Exactly. Think about this. Yeah. Well, I want to share the goddess that I pulled from the deck regarding this podcast and just asking what wanted to be shared tonight. And this is from a deck that I highly recommend if you want to work with the goddesses and get to know them in their expressions throughout the world. This is by Megan Waterston, and boy, did she do her work in the Divine Feminine Oracle. The artwork is by Lisbeth Cheever-Gezeman. It's absolutely gorgeous. And the goddess that came forth, and I apologize for any mispronunciation of words, I am learning these words as I'm beginning to expand my world outside of banking in church. You know what I'm saying? I was in that matrix for 20 years. So it's like the last 10 years have been mind-blowing. So I apologize, not meant to mispronounce any of these words. She's called Mashig Labdron, the diamond-hearted Dakini. And her mantra is, I see the light in my own darkness. I face my ego beliefs to feel free. Who she is. Machig Labdron takes the dark and transmutes it into only more light. Tibetan Buddhists believe that Yishi Tazagal was reborn as Mashig Labdron and that both were incarnated Buddha Vajranogi. Mashig's mother had an auspicious dream right before giving birth. 7 dakinis poured water over her body, blessing her, purifying her, and prophetically relating that this little baby girl would also be a dakini. As a young woman, Mashig made a living by reading the Prajnaparamita Sutra, or the Heart Sutra, which is the most beloved wisdom text in Mahayana Buddhism. People considered it a great blessing to have it read in their homes. After leaving a monastic order, Mashig married and lived what is referred to as the red and white essence of mystical union. She practiced tantric union with her husband while raising a family together. Her son became one of her greatest successors. Mashig developed the tantric Buddhist practice of Chad. These teachings were the first Buddhist teachings to emerge in Tibet. Chad is referred to as the cutting off ritual. A demon, according to Mashig, is anything that obstructs the achievement of freedom. Demons that are ego beliefs, not scary, hairy beasts, but inner barriers that keep us from realizing the nature of reality. The Chad practitioner visualizes their demon and then mentally cuts off parts of their own body as an offering to the demon. Mashig holds a traditional Tibetan Chad drum, a jamura, in one hand and a bell ganta in the other. Mashig, like Yishi Tesagal, lived until she was 99. And then according to Tibetan Buddhists, she reincarnated as Lama Tsam Alon, an American Buddhist teacher. Alamone explains in her book, Feeding Your Demons, that Chad is a method for bringing our shadow into consciousness and accessing the treasures it holds rather than repressing it. This powerful, unbroken lineage of female transmission reveals to us that enlightenment is about making the darkness conscious. Now, what are the odds of her coming forth out of all of these cards?
And that's exactly what we would expect if we believe in these tarot cards we use. But it's just so hard to believe, it's mind-blowing.
When your soul selects her card, from Mashag's perspective as an enlightened female, she knew that the difference between a god and a demon had to do with our own reaction to them.
Damn.
Those who cause us pain, she explained, also teach us patience, whereas those who bring gifts can distract us from our spiritual paths.
Yes.
No one and no single situation has the power to derail us. That is, unless we let it. The power rests within us. The spiritual path for Mashig was to become intimate with her inner demons, those thoughts or beliefs that kept her from experiencing joy, bliss, and pure love. The darkness within us isn't actually dark. It often feels threatening because some aspect of our intuition knows that when we face it, we will reclaim a lost part of our soul. We will heal. We will become more whole, and that ironically can be terrifying. We get so used to functioning with only one wing. We wonder, how can I fly now with two? I'll go too far, too high. Who will I become now that I'm free? And who will I lose in the elevation of my soul? Mashig is here to support us in seeing what's ready to come to the consciousness. She's here with her diamond heart to hold us as we feed one of our demons, not with fear, but with the knowledge that bringing it to the light and into the light will help set us free. Soul voice meditation. Is there an ego belief that I'm ready to see and release within me? An intention is, I see the light in my own darkness. I face my ego beliefs to feel free. Now, so mote it be, so mote it be, so mote it be. I am blown away that we pulled her. I had to read the whole thing because it's so profound. I could never have expressed it the way Megan did in beautiful words. Get this deck, guys. You'll love it.
Goddamn. And I also just fucking love Tibetan Buddhism because it is the philosophy of Buddhism combined with the color and the psychedelic universe of, the Hindu world, all meshed into one. One of the, main things in Tibetan Buddhism is surrounding a drink called Amrita, which gives enlightenment, similar to pretty much the same thing as we're talking about the Kukion. People are speculating it's psychedelic also.
Mm-hmm. Well, this has been a fascinating conversation, and I've really known that we have not even tipped the surface of Hekate or Hekate. I just hope that we did some she is certainly worth the view, the sustained view, and pause, and the ponder.
Oh, yeah. And the best way to learn about her is to work with her yourself. You can attempt to contact in meditation. Her reputation in the magical community is that she is easy to work with. She comes when called. Like the dogs that she's associated with. Not to like call her a dog or anything, but she's one of the easier to work with, especially for women.
Yeah, I don't know a lot about Tibetan Buddhism either, but I'm fascinated with it, and I'm really interested in the scrolls and the writings that are over there in the mountains. That's where I feel drawn. If I could go over there and just sit among them and read them, I just would be in heaven. I tell you what, it would be amazing. Thank you for everything that you brought to the table tonight and all your hard study. I appreciated it.
Thank you.
Expanded, my view on all this. So what are we going to do next week? I guess you said
Pan.
Mr. Pan. Oh man. I know very little about Pan, so it'll be interesting to see what I uncover with no knowledge.
That's not true.
Studying.
We've talked about Pan before.
Well, yeah, but I've never studied him, and that's.
I'm sure once you start studying him, he will seem real familiar. I just have a feeling.
All right. Well, Hekate, we send you out and we thank you. Thank you. I really
of course.
Step up to this call. Just really, and please bring Pan in, Hekate, because I have a feeling he's quite the rascal that you'll need to.
Of course.
But I identify with Pan. I know I do. I could feel it. All right. Is that all we got?
Yes, it is.
Okay. Well, good night.
Good night.